And I'm live. Hello everybody. Steve, the amateur historian here. How you doing? I I did my first live stream ever last night, and I liked it. I enjoyed it. It felt very loose and casual.
I enjoyed it. It felt very loose.
What's happening?
I enjoyed it. It felt very loose. What's happening?
Damn. Sorry. I didn't realize it was gonna. I had another window open to show me the countdown. I forgot to close it, so it started playing the live feed as I was doing it. So that was some feedback. Anyway, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit tonight about something I haven't thought about in a while, which is the 1946 torso murder mystery. They call it kind of the Portland torso murder mystery, even though it didn't actually happen quite in Portland. But, you know, no story name is perfect most of the time. But one of the main reasons I started thinking about that was I'm working on a new thing right now, recording the voiceovers, editing newspaper clippings, looking at pictures, so on and so forth. And the thing I'm doing now, this story is very close in terms of what happened to this particular case. And it was a documentary that I poured like 6-7 months of my time into. So it was a significant thing, and it's on my channel. I put that in the description of this video. Like, it's on my channel. Go find it. It's called The Woman in the River, and it's on my channel. And that's the documentary account that I made of this particular murder mystery. And oh god, I feel I was ready to go, and then I took a shower. And for some reason, when I take showers in the evening, I get all hot and gross, and I feel a little stiffness in the arm, but whatever. I'm also going to be doing, I did this last night. I also hope my audio isn't too terrible. I'm using the mic it worked out okay. It wasn't perfect, but you could understand what I was saying last night. So, but I was playing some old school Mario Kart on the GameCube that I got sitting down here. No worries, it's not a distraction. It's not going to make me be like, I've played this. Me and my girlfriend just play this habitually. It's one of our things. So trust me, I can play this game almost with my eyes closed. So that said, let's delve in. Because one of the reasons I want to do this was, when you do the documentary, you have to be direct, concise. You can't branch out in certain things if it's going to take up too much time, if it's going to kill the pacing of your documentary or whatever. So this is a chance to kind of speak more casually. And in some ways go a little bit more in depth about what happened. And in this case, it started, I believe, again, a few of the minute details I might forget, and that's just because I haven't really looked into this case that much since I did the documentary, which I finished in late spring of 2017. So it's been, 3 years since I finished this. Whoa, kitties. That is not necessary. Hey. I got your YouTube drama right here. These two have been getting along perfectly up until about 10 seconds ago. Guys, just deal. Just chill together. I don't want to have to separate you. I'm trying to live stream. They've got that look on their faces, like they're ready to combat at any moment. But I believe the first discovery in this case, the thing that started the whole thing off, was on April 12th, 1946. So, World War II has been over for almost a year. And, to some degree, that's probably making people feel really good. But then, some people aren't having it so good. And one of those people was someone whose remains were discovered in the Willamette River in an area that's known. It's one of those like unincorporated townships, whatever. And it's Oak Grove, which is where I lived like half my life. I lived in Oak Grove from late 1992 till early 2009, so almost 17 years. So almost half my life was spent in Oak Grove, and it's this small, pretty much, you got Portland, big old Portland up here, then there's Milwaukee bordering it directly to the south, then there's this big space, and then Gladstone, and this is Oak Grove, that area between Milwaukee and Gladstone, and then Oregon City's just south of Gladstone, to kind of organize that for you. And so, Oak Grove isn't even really a town. And when I first discovered this case, because they call it the Portland torso murder, and so um, I had no idea until I actually started researching it. They said that it happened at the site where River Villa Park now stands today. And I'm like, wait a minute, River Villa Park. I know River. I don't know it that well, but River Villa Park. That sounds really familiar. River Villa Park is a very small park located on kind of the northern end of Oak Grove, like just a couple blocks before you enter into Milwaukee. And I was like, wait. So you mean to tell me that there was a big, like, unsolved torso murder case that happened, or at least the start of the case, the start of the investigation, the start of anyone's knowledge that something had happened to someone in such a gruesome and graphic way, started in this little place that I spent a good chunk of my life growing up in? And when that became a reality, the fact that this case came straight out of the area that I, you know, did a lot of my growing up in, all of a sudden it was like this was going to be maybe a YouTube video, just a random YouTube video. And then it turned into, like, me pulling out my big my big Canon DSLR and my sound equipment, my actual film equipment, and I made something a little bit more high end, not the most high end thing in the world, but hey, I don't have a lot of resources. And I decided I was going to make my first real legit documentary. Once I had that realization, and essentially, again, I believe April 14th, 1946, there was a couple, the Raiders, who were out for a walk down by the river. In this particular area, it actually used to be called the Oak Grove Beach, and it was actually kind of like a hip place to hang out, like in the 20s. And then kind of more people bought up the land, and it just became less and less of like a popular beach for people to hang out at, and it started becoming more secluded. But people would still go down there and walk the beach. And the Raiders were just doing that one night, and they saw a big burlap sack, like a feed sack, or like like those kind of sacks that, like, you'll find, like, the really big bags of rice. They're like almost these like woven bags. It was one of those. Sorry, of course, like I said, I just got out of the shower and I'm all dry, and when that happens, like, the interior of my nose gets so itchy, and I look like I'm a drug addict, like trying to get my next score, just like, oh, just crash into a wall. So anyway, just trust me, that's just the dryness. If you see me itching at my nose, my apologies. So they decided, I think what they said was they thought it was maybe a bag of drowned kittens. Why they would think that immediately, I don't know. But that was the case. They thought it was a bag of drowned kittens. So they found a way to, maybe they grabbed a big stick and managed to kind of pull it to the shoreline. And they opened it up, and lo and behold was the torso, a complete torso of a woman, a fairly petite woman. She just used a very, very thin torso. Um, and every other part of her body had been hacked off. So it went from the base of her neck, and her shoulders, down to the base of her stomach. So her legs had been cut off, her arms had been cut off, and her head had been cut off, and it was just a torso. So this was wild. This was a wild discovery. Now, it wasn't the first time that this had happened, but it was still, this was 1946. The concept of serial killers wasn't even really a thing yet, and kind of brutal killers were pretty few and far between. You had a little less than a decade earlier, you had the Cleveland butcher, the Cleveland torso killer, who in the late 30s killed several people. was never legitimately identified. There was a guy that they were suspicious of that they felt was probably the guy, and right when attention got put on him, he voluntarily put himself into, I think, like a mental asylum. And while he was in that state, like the police couldn't touch him. So there was kind of a reason, like, to be even more suspicious of the guy. Like, why would you suddenly do something like that the moment the heat is suddenly on you? So they think that this one particular guy was potentially the torso killer in Cleveland, and it's kind of similar to our case. Like, there's or at least there's people that we think might, at least some researchers think might be the guilty party, but we don't know for dead certain. There's just not 100% definitive evidence. But still, by the time this happened in 1946, this was a very rare thing to find just a hunk of somebody's body. And, it wasn't like this person had fallen into the ocean and animals had ripped away at its body. The body had been cleanly cut. And I show all these pictures in my documentary. It was hard to find a lot of imagery, but I found enough. And there's a picture I have of, it's literally just a doctor standing over this big slab of human remains. And they were somewhat decomposed, not horribly. God, I am so sorry. My nose is itching so bad. Right nostril. And the doctor's just standing over the body, and you see this officer behind him, and the officer is kind of like smirking as he's staring at it. And I'm like, what is so funny about this? And of course, people had no idea who this was. They initially thought it might have been a teenage girl, and then upon actually examining it and doing what you could do medically in a scenario like that, they determined that it was likely a woman around the age of like 50. They could approximate how tall she was, how much she probably weighed. They figured she was probably about 5'3", 5'4". But again, fairly petite. And they figured she'd been dead at least like 2 weeks. It was hard to say for certain because she hadn't been just like rotting away in a field somewhere. She'd been likely underwater or in the water for a pretty lengthy period of time. So it was, how much the water had helped with, the depreciation of her flesh was hard to say. But they figured the earliest, or the latest rather, that she had been killed was probably the start of April, so only like 2 weeks before. It was anywhere from like 2 to 4 weeks after her murder that they think the body was found. So you have like a disappearing time period of like mid-March to the start of April when this victim would have been killed and thus, vanished, not been around anymore. But it still wasn't a lot to go on, unfortunately. You have a torso of a woman who you can generally predict roughly how old she was, her height and stuff, but there was nothing to go on. You need fingerprints, you need a head, you need something. And I believe it wasn't even 48 hours later. There was some workers down in Oregon City, pretty much along the Willamette River, which the Willamette River is the river that goes through downtown Portland. It's the river where the torso was fished from, and it goes down into Oregon City. And the area going back, over a century has just been lined with different mills and factories. And there was some workers that noticed a burlap sack a couple weeks before these torso remains were found. They'd seen a burlap sack floating around in the Willamette River, just north of Willamette Falls, which that's kind of where the factories end, is where Willamette Falls is. And so they decided to go give it a look and, see if they could find this burlap sack. Maybe there was remains in this sack too. They didn't know. And they managed to find, presumably the sack, unless it was another sack different from the one they saw. And whatever sack it was, they found it. They fished it ashore, and they found, I believe it was like pieces of the. It was like one of the thighs, and I think most of the legs of some of a person. Pretty quickly. They matched those pieces up. You match how the cutting looks, how the skin looks, all that stuff. And they determined pretty quickly that they felt the torso and these leg pieces were from the same person. Um, and that was kind of it for a while. They found the bottom, almost 2/3 of a woman, again, presumably around 50 years of age, and that was really it. They didn't have, they weren't making any more discoveries. They were obviously searching. They were dragging the rivers and stuff, and there was like the Tualatin River and the Clackamas River, these other, waterways that broke off the Willamette. They started searching down there. Maybe more parts were thrown in the Willamette and got sucked down these other rivers. Who was to say, really? And yeah, a couple weeks went by, and then it's a couple of months, and then all of a sudden it's like, are we ever gonna figure this out? It's already kind of becoming forgotten, and it's important to remember that this was the same year. I think it was a couple of months. It was right around the same time that the lipstick murder started happening in Chicago, and because that involved multiple victims, and it had the drama of the killer, like writing these, "Please stop me before I kill more people. I can't control myself." Writing these messages in lipstick on the deceased people's walls, and the fact that it was in Chicago as opposed to smaller Portland, which is way off on the West Coast. That was kind of the big crime story that was going on. And this torso murder, which was big national news for like a week, it was quickly starting to get forgotten. And I want to say it was the summer. Um, all of a sudden, there was another package that was discovered. And it was actually discovered floating in the Clackamas River near the Abernathy Bridge, which is Highway 99 crossing over between Gladstone and Oregon City. And it's literally like maybe a couple 100 feet off of where the Clackamas River branches off the Willamette River. So the remains might have been deposited in the Willamette and rolled into the Clackamas, but I don't believe that, because the Clackamas actually flows out into the Willamette. So in order for these remains to have gone from the Willamette River and then up the Clackamas River, the remains literally would have had to have floated against the current. And again, there was this idea. There's an old railroad bridge that's right there by the park where the torso was found, and Oregon City. There's the old Oregon City bridge that was just north of where the leg pieces were found. So there was, where these other, two sets of remains were found, there was always a bridge just right next to it. And while I don't think anybody who's looked into this case has suggested this as a possibility, there is a railroad bridge that crosses the Clackamas River just a little past the Abernathy Bridge. It runs right next to where I-205, the freeway, crosses the Clackamas River, so it's almost hidden next to the freeway. And if you could have thrown something into the river from that railroad bridge, and it likely would have been following the current heading towards that Abernathy Bridge. So I think it's very possible that that was one of the main methods used to dispose of these body parts. Was they were using bridges. Back in the day, there was still a lot more stuff that was being delivered through cargo trains, so there was a lot more trains being used, because it was a different time, and there were. So it made sense, because it was a lot easier to sneak into cargo trains back then, and you could sneak onto a train, sneak into a boxcar, whatever, with these remains, and then as the train crossed a bridge, you could open the door and toss it out in the water, and no one would, especially if nobody even knew you were on the train, nobody would be suspicious of you, it'd be different than, like, say, throwing a body out of your car in the middle of the street. Like, there'd be people around that could see you. So I kind of think that, definitely railroad bridges could have been used, and the railroad lines. There's the Brooklyn Railway rail yards that I discuss in my film. That kind of, it's this big rail yard, and then kind of railway lines kind of just branch off in various directions. And there's a straight line that goes down through Milwaukee. And at one point, that one particular line splits off and becomes two, one of which goes off into Oak Grove and eventually crosses the river into Lake Oswego. That's and that bridge crossing the river between Lake Oswego and Oak Grove is the bridge that would have been near where the torso was found. The line that doesn't branch off that way and goes off another way keeps going south and ultimately ends up in Oregon City, right next to where the leg remains were found. And so, someone literally could have taken cargo trains from the same rail yard and ended up at these two different bridges that are right, or one is a bridge and one's a railway line. Blah. One is a bridge and the other, yeah, that's what I meant to say. God. So, you could have gone from one particular area and gotten to both these general places where the victim's remains were left. And they said that they found footprints from someone leading from the railroad tracks, the specific railroad line that went down into Oregon City. They could track someone's railroad tracks from that railway line down to the river, the shoreline there. And the footprints ended in the general vicinity of where that burlap sack holding the leg remains was found in. So I definitely believe whoever did it, they were utilizing the trains. And that same line that goes through to Oregon City, that's the same one that crosses the Clackamas River, just upstream from the Abernathy Bridge. So someone literally could have thrown the remains off on that bridge. They're eventually discovered by the Abernathy Bridge. They travel, maybe not even a mile further on down the line, and you're suddenly right there where you could get off and to dispose of the remains near Willamette Falls. You literally could have had a couple people get on two different trains in the same rail yard and deposit those remains in that one night. It would have been very, very simple. That's kind of my theory that I go with. Is I think they obviously used vehicles to transport the remains to the rail yard, but it was a big rail yard. It's even today, like you can literally, there's parts that I walk by where literally you can just walk right. And obviously, if someone sees you, they'll say, "Hey, who the hell are you? Get out of here." But if someone doesn't see you, you don't have to hop a fence to get into that rail yard. You could walk right in there. Even today, there's like access points. You can walk right in there. And I'm assuming it would have been even easier to access back in 1946. So you sneak into that railroad yard, sneak into a couple cars, and boom, the job's done. And, you could, especially in the case of the Oak Grove remains, you could cross the railroad bridge from Oregon City into Lake Oswego, toss the remains out of the train, and next thing you know, you get into Lake Oswego a minute later, you hop off the train, you're just another guy walking through town. It would have been very easy to do. And I want to say a little bit later on, they found some hair, like some scalp, also in Oregon City, that they think might have belonged to the victim. They're not 100% certain, but they think it was. But all of this paled in comparison to the discovery. I believe they made it in October of 1946, so it's months after the torso has been found. We have months of no resolutions in this case. And all of a sudden, right there in the same area, literally right by Rivervilla Park, we're talking within 50 to 100 feet of where the burlap sack containing the torso was found, all of a sudden, somebody sees a little sphere wrapped up in stuff with hair on it floating in the river. It's pulled ashore, and it was the head of the torso victim. And the only reason I even found a picture of the torso victim's head is because it was on a one of those like informational posters, like, we're here, we found a head, we don't know who this person is, whoever has information, bring it to us, please. God, my nose is still itching and my voice is already going hoarse. It's because I'm inflecting. I'm trying to throw my voice because I know this mic isn't that great. I'm gonna try talking in my regular voice so that I don't fry it as quickly. So, you think, okay, we've found the head. Like, we're gonna find out who this person is now. They discovered that I think her upper teeth were mostly fake, like she had dentures. Which of course, people's teeth they all went bad, back then. I mean, they still do now, but I mean, even more so then. But her lower teeth were mostly natural. So you think, okay, should they be able to compare her dental records? They'll find her dental records and we'll figure out who this victim is. It's one of the most grisly murders in the history of Portland, and it hasn't been solved. Like, they should be on top of getting this figured out, and they have the ability to now because they have the head. And unfortunately, the head had probably been in the water for months. So you could, even though the head face still had skin on it, the skin was turning kind of a greenish color. Her eyes were gone. Everything was just wrinkled. She was too battered to like definitively be identified or like, be compared to pictures and be like, oh yeah, that looks like her. That's probably who it is. And just nothing happened. Nothing happened. They never figured out who this person was, even though they found her head. They found her head, and they still couldn't figure out who she was. And there may be a benign reason why that happened, but I honestly think there were people out there that didn't want the identity of this individual to be figured out because they had secrets to hide connected to it. And if this person turned up dead, they'd have to start answering some questions. And when I say they, at least as far as I'm concerned, I'm talking about the Portland police at the time. Which leads me more towards, who do I think the victim was? Because again, it's unknown to this day exactly where this victim was actually murdered, whether they were in Portland or anywhere else. But the fact of the matter is, all of the remains were found either the head and the torso were found in Oak Grove, which again is kind of an unincorporated area, which means it's actually a county police issue. Now, the legs were found in Oregon City. And I didn't mention when I said there was other remains found. The ones by the Abernathy Bridge, it was one of the thighs. One of the thighs was found in Oregon City. The other thigh was found in this bag under the Abernathy Bridge. That's what was actually found there. And there was a suitcase found about 60 feet past it that had a bunch of petite women's clothing in it. So another thing to kind of tie the victims together was this idea that it was a petite woman. Now, those were found because, again, Abernathy Bridge crosses between Gladstone and Oregon City. I'm guessing Oregon City had control over that. But the fact of the matter is, those police forces compared to Portland's police force were meek. And the city of Portland police, willingly got involved, even though this was a case that was out of their jurisdiction. They threw themselves into this case. And, almost without even being asked. So you're like, well, why are these guys so willingly, throwing themselves into this case when it's not even in their city or their county? And I think it's because they wanted to use their power to quash any actual legitimate investigation of this thing. And I say that because I think they had reason to do so. And here's where the second half of my documentary is focused in on who I actually think was this torso victim. And that was a woman who would have been about 63 at the time, I think. So she would have been a little bit older than they had to predict about how old. Again, you have dead flesh here that's been dead and floating in the river for weeks. So they predicted the woman was about 50 years old. Now, this woman would have been about 63. So that's like the only thing. That's like the biggest piece of info against her being the victim, is that she's like 10, 12 years younger than they predicted the body was. But again, they had to guesstimate the actual age. So I don't think it's certainly not a determining factor against the other stuff involved. But this woman was named Anna Schrader. Very, very attractive young woman who relocated to the Portland area during a time when a lot of women were. In the post in 1905 Lewis and Clark Exposition time period, there was just a boom of women that came to Portland, because there actually wasn't that much of a female population in Portland before then. There was like, almost 10 men for every woman in the city. And Anna Schrader moved here from a small town. I forget what it was called, but it was a small town in Minnesota. And I think, like a lot of people, she was coming to a city where women were suddenly flocking to, and it was more of a city as opposed to a small town. I think she's one of these people that wanted to, become more high society. That certainly seemed to be the objective, because, she wasn't living here that long before she was she was a real attention seeker. And she got married not long after moving here to a local Portland man, and that was because that's just what you did. If you were a good, honest, decent woman, you got married and you found a nice guy to marry. If you were single, I mean, of course, aside from being young, that was a strike against you. And yeah, like when I interviewed some local historians about this who'd written a little bit about it, and they talked about how Anna Schrader she swam across the river in the middle of December, and she did these things to try to get attention, and it was obvious that she wanted to be more than what she thought she was. And sometime around mid 1910s, like 1915 maybe, Anna Schrader meets a local, very popular, very well-respected Portland officer named William Bruning. And William Bruning, not long after they meet, gets her a job with the Portland police. And essentially she goes out to these kind of sketchy places, sketchy bars, sketchy saloons, places where any kind of suspect vice might be going on. And she would, just act like another person hanging out there, and she would buy some drinks with some people, but she was essentially an informant. She would go to these places and try to figure out what was going on that shouldn't have been going on, and she would eventually report back to the police. So she was an asset in a way that women really weren't at the time, which is interesting because, again, Portland had such a meek female population for so long, and so it was very, very unique. There barely were any women working at any level with the police, and if they were probably usually working, at a desk or something. They were working like the switchboards, and they were maybe doing dispatch, if that. And here Anna Schrader's is, just a random woman, and she's actually kind of out there in the field, doing almost, private detective-ish type work. And, you think like, well, why did she get special treatment? Why did she get a job like this? Well, one of the main reasons William Bruning got her a job is almost as quickly as they met, they started sleeping together. And, Anna Schrader was, supposedly a happily married woman, and you didn't get divorced. That was not going to look good on her reputation, and she wanted the reputation. She obviously didn't want the responsibility, but she wanted that, the reputation of a popular woman in town. So they kept this as a secret. They weren't very good at it. They would rendezvous at, Anna Schrader's house, which actually Anna Schrader's home was located on Ross Avenue, a stretch of road that doesn't exist anymore because she lived about what would be about 2-3 blocks north of where the Moda Center is, and the Rose Quarter and all that. But of course, back in the 40s, none of that stuff existed yet. And so, yeah, it was a lot more residential. A lot of homes were demolished so they could put the Memorial Coliseum in there in the 50s, late 50s. And so, yeah, so the area where she lived, it doesn't even look remotely the same anymore. But yeah, she lived just north of the Moda Center and the Rose Quarter and all that. That's where her and her husband lived, in a big apartment house. And she would bring William Bruning home, and they'd have, romantic dinners and stuff together. And there were multiple times where her husband would come home unexpectedly early from work, and she'd have to like run Bruning out the back door so her husband wouldn't catch her in the act. So they weren't great at, or at least they weren't very smart about concealing it, but they managed to conceal it for almost a decade. I think about 1921 ish was when they first started seeing each other. And yeah, so it would last until 1929. So, question then is, what happened to bring that to a crashing halt? Well, Anna Schrader was on paper it seemed like she was a happily married woman, but obviously she wasn't that happy because she was seeing another guy. And William Bruning had a wife too, and he knew what it would mean for his reputation to, not just the idea of people finding out that he was cheating on his wife as this, upstanding policeman whose job is to uphold the law. As time went on, because this is what always happens, when you start fooling around behind closed doors in a romantic sense, you're going, eventually you're going to find out that your objectives, what you want from this, aren't necessarily going to match. And William Bruning was, having a good time with, an attractive woman who was kind of popular and well respected in the city. But it was kind of, it was about the fun for him, or it was about, having someone else who wasn't his wife or whatever. There was nothing serious about it. And, on the side of Anna Schrader, she wanted them to be together. And it was getting to a point where she was ready to, pull the plug on her marriage. But she obviously wanted William Bruning to do the same. She wanted them to be husband and wife. And William Bruning is like, nah, I'm not throwing my career away for this. He would have been ruined by this. So, understandably, things start getting very tense, and William Bruning decides to, start separating from Anna Schrader and breaking things off. And it all peaks one night in 1929. Anna Schrader, because again, she's still working for the police force at this time, and she manages to get her hands on a weapon. I'm thinking through her police connections. And she goes to William Bruning's house. Claims she hasn't lost her mind. She's not going to shoot the guy or anything. But, she claims that she wants to talk to him about things, that she wants to force him to listen to her. So what better way to do that than to have a gun? You're going to listen to what I have to say. She claims that was her objective, and I don't know. There didn't seem to be anything maniacal and murderous in her um, behavioral pattern, so I don't think Anna Schrader was actually going there to kill him. But she shows up right as Bruning's coming home, and she approaches him, and he sees her with a gun, and he immediately attacks her. Um, thinking she's lost her mind and that she's gonna, kill her or kill him. And he because of course he's she's a small petite woman and he's a big strong masculine policeman, and he completely overtakes her, grabs her, slams her to the ground. I think he actually bruised her ribs and stuff, and had to completely overcome her to disarm her. And it was just a big, big thing. It blew up into a scandal, and it was a scandal that was kind of, you know, people were paying attention to it. It was in the papers, and it had everybody's attention for a couple of years, because at that moment, that was when everything blew up. And of course, Anna Schrader made her claims to help herself. William Bruning said that, she was out of her mind and it didn't mean anything and nothing's, and it ended up developing, this major conflict because they both still worked for the police department. And essentially what happened was police department quickly got rid of Anna Schrader. So they totally sided with Bruning, which, even though, he'd been with the police longer, it was kind of a betrayal in Anna Schrader's eyes, because she'd been working there for a very long time. And so she was, these were her colleagues, from, the random beat cops all the way up to the police chief. For them to all just say, well, we're siding with Bruning on this, which you would expect a bunch of dudes to do. That was that was a betrayal for her. And she ended up, they tried to get her charged. I think she got off, but they tried to get her charged with attempted murder. They tried to claim that because she showed up with a gun, she came there with an intent to kill. And of course, Bruning was going to say that because he needed to say whatever he could to help his situation. I'm just the guy trying to make my marriage work, and she's the lunatic with a gun trying to ruin my marriage. I'm sure that's the direction that the commentary was going in. And ultimately, though, because it was such a big scandal and it was such a hot thing, it was, when all is said and done, Bruning also lost his job too. Completely ruined his career. I know he ended up working just a string of menial jobs. His wife eventually did leave him, or they parted amicably. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I know, though, by the time of his torso murder that they had been separated. And he was, essentially by 1946, William Bruning was working. He had a badge, but he was almost just kind of a glorified security guard. They were almost kind of, the police force was kind of throwing crumbs to him. I think the police, they were all, a bunch of bros. It's a big fraternal thing. I don't think they wanted to get rid of Bruning back in 1930 or whatever, but the pressure was just too much at the time. And, you had pretty much two people who were both claiming that they were cheating on their, respective others. And these were, two fairly popular people who were both suddenly showing themselves to be kind of, a little bit detestable, a little bit lacking in moral fiber, or I don't know, whatever the hell the people wanted to think. So there's a lot of baggage here. And almost as quickly as this happened, as the police force kind of turned their back on Anna Schrader in this time. Anna Schrader, again, she'd worked for the police department for almost a decade, which means she was there. She saw all the sketchy behind the door stuff that was going on. She was probably there to see a lot of it. She really was. And there was so much sketchiness going on with the Portland police in the 1920s. There was illegal booze operations going on. There was a lot of stuff going on. And she was definitely, we know based on some documentation that she was aware that they were engaged in illegal liquor operations, which could have gotten the police force in so much trouble. And she started supporting, there was a recall effort being made against George Baker, who was the mayor of the town at the time, and was also, he had this secret police force going on. And So Schrader even kind of knew Mayor Baker, and when there was a recall effort out against him in around 1932, Anna Schrader actually temporarily threw her hat in the ring to run for mayor of Portland. I don't know why that didn't go anywhere, but it didn't. But she made a big hullabaloo out of all this stuff, and she essentially said, again, this is in the early 30s, right after the scandal broke, she said that she had a little black book somewhere, and that in it she had all of this information that she'd kept in relation to, the Portland police and their evil doings, whatever they were doing, and that one day she was going to use that information to quote rock the city of Portland. So the Portland police knew that she did know stuff, so they had reason to be afraid of Anna Schrader. But then kind of nothing really happened. The 30s gave way to the 40s. But one big thing changed in 1946, right around the time that Anna Schrader disappeared, or around the time this torso murder happened. And that was Leon Jenkins, who was the Portland police, the chief of police, and he'd been the chief of police when this scandal broke, and he was integral in siding with Bruning over Anna Schrader, and she'd been close to him. She said he was like a father to her, so his was a massive betrayal, and he was no longer the police chief by the 1940s, or that was it. Harry Niles was the chief of police in Portland, but he started getting ill, and he ended up dying. But before he did, he had to let go of his position as the police chief because he just wasn't healthy enough anymore. So they had to find a new police chief. And who ended up taking that spot right around the time that this torso murder happens? Leon Jenkins gets his job back. And Leon Jenkins definitely had, a sketchy past to some degree. And it's believed that Anna Schrader knew a lot about that. And the fact that they would suddenly put him back into power, a lot of people think Anna Schrader got pissed and probably started making her threats again. She's an older woman now. It seems like she's gone into seclusion. Her husband is dead by 1946, but some people think that she maybe got pissed seeing this happen and was threatening again, years later to rock the city of Portland again. That's at least, it makes sense. And, right, this is 1946. And then all of a sudden, April comes and parts of an unknown woman's body start showing up in, the river. And right at the same time, Anna Schrader vanishes forever. That's one of the key things is Anna Schrader just vanished. And it was the last time she was seen was like a couple of weeks before these remains started turning up. And again, by the time these remains were first being found, they thought this person had been dead for a couple of weeks. So there's another reason to think it might have been Anna Schrader, and a reason to think that the police would have been directly involved because they had reason to be afraid of her. And with Leon Jenkins getting back into power, they had reason to be afraid that, she might spike up as an issue again. See, the thing is there were other potential victims in this thing. They were looking at other women. There was a woman named Eva Pankow who had disappeared in 1944. By the time this torso turned up, she'd been missing for like 2 years. So unless she was being like kept hidden away somewhere for a long time, it didn't seem like she was a very valid person. But she disappeared under really mysterious circumstances. She had gotten married. The marriage didn't last long. The guy was kind of an abusive jerk. And wherever she moved to next, the house she moved into next, I think was like Southeast Portland. And her house ended up catching on fire. And in the aftermath of the blaze, they never found her remains there, and they never found her anywhere. After that, they have no verification that she died. But when after her house burned down, she was never seen after that. There was a woman named Bessie Nevins who had relocated to Oregon from California and claimed that she was I'm gonna go work on a ranch somewhere, and it was known that sketchy characters, mob type characters, tended to run ranches up in Oregon, and like some people just disappeared if they saw what they weren't supposed to see or did the wrong thing or whatever. And so this Bessie Nevins woman relocated to around Portland and disappeared, and so. There was specific reasons why Bessie Nevins wasn't the victim. I think she was a little bit too young, and but the one that I was most interested in, aside from Anna Schrader, was a woman named Marion Coffey who lived, I want to say, Southwest Portland, because she went to this place. God, what was it called? But it was a tavern, Tillicum Tavern. It was Tillicum Tavern. The building's still there, along the highway going into Beaverton. It's been closed down. It was closed down when I shot video there in early 2017, but the building's still there. I think it's along Highway 54, kind of near Jesuit High School, kind of southwest Portland, heading towards Beaverton. And Marion Coffey would go there a lot and try to pick up on guys. And she'd, wander off with, random guys she met and hooked up with. She was, that's just who she was. And part of the reason she was like that was she was in a very unhappy marriage with this really abusive dickhead who said he'd kill her if he ever caught her wandering off with another man. And seeing as the murder victim was, killed and then chopped up, it seemed like it was a crime of passion of some kind, whatever that passion may have been. And Marion Coffey disappeared again, kind of right around the same time Anna Schrader would have vanished. And she was never really seriously looked at as a victim. And, the last time she was seen, apparently she went to the Tillicum Tavern and left with a guy named James. Code name James. That's all we really knew about the guy. And then, all of a sudden she was gone, and her husband, right after the torso was found, stormed into the Tillicum Tavern with this newspaper, showing, body remains have been found. And he went up to the main barkeep or whoever and exclaimed, like, "Have you seen this? It's Marion. I know it is." And I never found any verification that Marion was found after that. So she was definitely an interesting possibility. And I know in the documentary, they give one reason why she couldn't have been the victim. And I don't remember what it was, but it was definitely very interesting. But it's this representation of this fact that there was, here we're trying to figure out who this one murder victim is. And there's all these women that were disappearing. The Portland police got letters from as far away as Pennsylvania when this case happened and they didn't know who the victim is. They got letters from people as far away as Pennsylvania saying, "Hey, my sister, my cousin, my best friend, so-and-so, so on and so forth. I haven't seen them in such a long time." And it was like people all over the country had these, missing friends and relatives and so on and so forth who they wondered, they had no idea what happened to them. And so they would contemplate hell, I don't have the slightest idea where this person is. And they haven't identified this person. So, hey, maybe it's this person. Here's, a description of my friend or my family member, my loved one, my sister, my wife. So it was really sad kind of just, seeing that this torso murder was graphic, but it was just one case of a woman disappearing in a time period where there was just so many women disappearing without a trace. Like, it was crazy how frequent it really was. So yeah, there were other possible people, but the big difference between Anna Schrader and these other women were these other women, as far as we know, didn't have any real connection with the police. They didn't have any dirt. They didn't have any reason for the police to get involved in their murders if they happened outside of their city. However, Anna Schrader dying and her body parts starting to turn up in a whole other county, You can see why the Portland police did what they did, which is they stuck their face into this investigation when they didn't need to. It wasn't in their jurisdiction. But of course, if they're involved or know some of the in-depth details, of course they're going to know she's the victim, as the body parts start showing up. But it's in their best interest to see that, as little of an investigation is done as possible. Because the more investigation that's done, the better chances there are of finding out it is Anna Schrader. And again, as I said before, you find out who the victim is, all of a sudden, you know, you're going to have more specific people to, inquire to. And if the police can keep you from knowing that it's Anna Schrader, then they're not going to come under suspicion because that you would have, considering Anna Schrader's past experience with them. All this stuff she said in the 30s about how she was going to rock the city of Portland and she was persona non grata with the police. They would follow her around town and they would every time she parked her car, they would ticket her car. There was at least one instance of like gunshots were fired at her house, and we all know it was people connected with the police. And so, it was obvious that they felt threatened by her enough to threaten her life. They'd made attempts on her life before, so why would they not do it again? So, so again, they had incentive to keep this murder under wraps. And I think that's why, even after the head was discovered, why didn't anything come of that? Why, she still had her original bottom teeth. Why couldn't those be compared to dental records so we could figure out who she was? Why weren't these simple solutions not happening? And the fact of the matter is, the Portland police probably were, they were a much more powerful police force than any other one in the area, and they probably did their best to quash this. Like, don't worry about it, don't look into it. We'll deal with it. We'll figure it out. And then, time goes by, people weren't as suspicious. It really took until the JFK assassination before people really, really, as a larger whole, started getting really suspicious of government bodies, legal, law enforcement agencies, so on and so forth. Back in the 40s, people really didn't suspect much about the police. And if the police ever got busted on something, they'd throw a few people to the wolves and be like, all right, we got rid of the bad apples. You can trust us, though. When usually it was the higher up brass that come away unscathed who were behind everything. And I genuinely theorize. I mean, the police were doing plenty of sketchy stuff back then. And I think they felt very threatened. And it's just my theory that they were directly involved in the murder of Anna Schrader, and that she is the one who turned up, most of her body parts turned up in waterways south of Portland. Again, maybe the Portland police thought by depositing them, outside of town, people wouldn't be suspicious that somebody from Portland directly was involved. I don't know what they were thinking. But when I did my interviews, one of the really interesting pieces of information I was told was that out of nowhere, William Bruning, again, their scandal breaks in 1929. They pretty much don't talk to each other for like 15 years. And then suddenly William Bruning actually contacted Anna Schrader, relatively close to her disappearance. So all of a sudden he wants to get back in touch with her and see if they'll, bury the hatchet. His wife's dead, her husband's dead. All of a sudden, it seems like he's trying to win her back. And yet up to that point, it seemed like he despised her. She ruined his life. I mean, obviously, it was his responsibility to, he shared plenty of responsibility in what happened to them. But that had been his attitude, was that Anna Schrader ruined his life. His wife eventually left him. He lost his job. He was working this joke of a job as like a security guy. He tried to act like he was a cop, but he really wasn't anymore. And the thing is, he was still close to his fellow police guys. Um, and, he was in a position to where he could help the police out. And if he agreed to help the police out, they could be like, hey, if you do something like this for us, maybe we'll help you. Maybe we'll get you like a better type work. If you do us a solid, and that solid would be luring Anna Schrader somewhere. So he calls her up, tries to get back into her good graces. She's in her early 60s. Her husband's gone. She obviously was madly in love with this guy. And even though this thing went south in 1929, I don't really think she held William Bruning as responsible as she should have. I think she had a lot more of her anger was focused on other members of the police. And I think in her mind, she just always believed that whatever form of denial you need to put yourself into, I think she believed that William Bruning, even all those years later, he was still that love, that one that got away. And I think, almost in a heartbeat, she would have reconnected with him, especially at that point in their lives. She'd almost been kind of in seclusion. And now it was like she could almost have some semblance of that life back that she'd had once upon a time. God, I can't. My nose is so itchy, and every time I itch it, my face just gets drier. Of course, I'm drinking down root beer when I have a full glass of water right here. Like an idiot. But, oh snap. So yeah, I think there was definite incentive on her part to, if Bruning called her up, she'd be like, oh hell yeah, I'll be right over there. And he could have led her anywhere. He could have led her to a place that he claimed he was living in. He could have said, hey, I'm working here now, and led her to some warehouse somewhere. And wherever she went, I think more than Bruning was there waiting for her. There's the slight possibility. I don't really believe this. There's the slight possibility that maybe Bruning snapped and came up with this thing himself and ended up, losing his mind and contacting her. Hey, honey bunny, come back into my life. And he just led her somewhere and brutally attacked her and killed her and cut her up. And this just maniacal, like, you ruined my life and now I'm going to ruin yours in a way that goes way beyond what you did. I mean, again, it appears to be definitely a crime of passion. And once they found the head, they noticed there was massive blunt force trauma to it, that likely she got beaten in the head with some kind of heavy club or something like that. And that was likely what killed her, before the dismembering. So there's the possibility that he just snapped and did it himself, and then the police found it. He maybe called some former police colleagues and was like, guys, I think I messed up. I lost it. And they realized, like, well, yeah, we can just say we don't know anything about it. But, with the past that she had with the police and that fractured relationship, a lot of people could still end up believing that the police were involved in it. And they still might. Decide like, okay, well, we're going to have to do something about this. And they still could have been involved in getting rid of the body in that vein. But I feel like this was more of a constructed thing. I think this was more them putting a hand on his shoulder and saying, hey, Bill, we need you to do us a favor. You scratch our back and we'll scratch yours. Anna Schrader's causing trouble again. I know you hate that bitch now. Something like that. And then they just, they say, call her up, tell her you'll meet her here. And then when she showed up, there's more than William Bruning there. And what's interesting is, I don't think they just lured her somewhere to kill her. I think they probably gave her an ultimatum. Shut your mouth or we're going to do something to you. And we're the cops. We can do whatever we want. And for all the hoopla, Anna Schrader was not one to be talked down to. Anna Schrader would tell you how things were going to go. But yeah, I think they probably gave her one last ultimatum: shut up or we're going to actually do harm to you. And she probably laughed at him and figured, oh yeah, good luck. Now more than ever, I'm going to go out and I'm going to spread all the information I knew about you. You guys are going to go down worse than you ever thought you would back in 1929. And they decided, well, all right, you forced our hand. And there was, she probably tried to struggle with them, and in the midst of that, because you, well, I mean, again, and I'm just, this is all theorization. I'm just, theorizing based on what I do know, which is, none of us knows a lot. Because I almost wonder now, because if these were police officers involved, you wonder why they didn't just shoot her and then cut her up. She was obviously beaten and attacked in that way. Now, it could just be one possibility is she could have been lured somewhere and then attacked there, so that she couldn't be lured into a building or something and then forced to sit down, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm in here and there's a bunch of guys here, so I can't do anything about it. It could have been more like, they lured her somewhere, and then, the moment she got there, someone leaped out of the darkness or whatever and struck her over the head with a blunt object. Heck, it could. Well, see, here's the reason why I don't think it was just a quick one and done. She was led somewhere, beaten, down she goes, dead. It's because even, after her death, it was discovered that she had spinach and potatoes in her system. Like, she'd been fed shortly before she died, because, like, this food was still in her system. So it seemed like she ate relatively close to her death. And there was a cabin in the Oak Grove area that had kind of come under suspicion in this. There was a suspicious guy living out there, and they kind of looked into him for a brief time. And they noticed that next to this cabin, or like the guy they visited, they found like a knife with blood on it. And he probably said it was like from a chicken he killed or something. But they noticed that he had a little garden and he was predominantly growing spinach and potatoes there. And it seemed like she had been taken, however that had to be, and she was kept somewhere for a while. She wasn't just killed on the spot. And she was not only kept somewhere a while, but she was fed during that time. Whoever her captives were, they fed her, which leads me to believe whoever kidnapped her, it wasn't their initial objective to kill her. They were maybe trying to make her feel, I mean, as comfortable as you could make somebody in those circumstances, but they were trying to play good cop before they had to play bad cop. And so they're like, hey, cut the crap. Oh, here's some food, by the way. And I think they threatened her. I find it very interesting that William Bruning again called her up right, before she disappears. And then later on, this torso victim turns up. And that's just kind of the theorization I'm playing with in terms of how I think she was nabbed and murdered, or how Anna Schrader would fit in as a victim in those circumstances. But beyond, all that, because you have to address the fact that, you can say whatever you want about how this person, fits, but, if you find the body of a 7-foot tall redheaded man and you're trying to say it's a 5'6" brunette woman, that's not going to fly. Like, does she match the victim? Again, you think like, oh, they found her head. How could they not figure it out? And I've looked at it, enough times. Because you only have this one picture I found, and it's a grueling picture. Because when the head was found, there was like wire wrapped around it, because all these body parts had been weighed down with weights before they were put into these burlap sacks. Because I think the objective was they wanted these body parts to sink to the bottom of the river to never be found again. And they obviously, whoever they hired to do the weight guy, he screwed the hell up, because all these parts ended up coming back to the surface of the water because he didn't weigh them down well enough. And I've looked at, there's one particular picture I found of Anna. Like I found a few pictures of Anna Schrader, but there was a particular picture I found from a little later on, around the time she would have been like in her mid 30s, kind of when the scandal was breaking, and kind of how she looked, where her hair was comparable length, and the angle of her face was comparable to the angle of the face of the torso victim's cut off head. And I forget what the term is, but the victim was found to have her hair, it was that very kind of flapper hairdo where the hair kind of went like this. Was it called like a Marcel, I think is what the type of hair is called. Um, the torso victim had that, and that is how Anna Schrader was known to have worn her hair. I examined the eyes of the victim were gone by the time she was found, but I also noticed that even trying to like look at her eye sockets and look at them how they would be with eyes, they were about the right shape with Anna Schrader's eyes, and the nose was really similar, and they both had very very small chins, and the picture is really kind of grueling and gruesome because with it being wrapped up, there was like wire or some kind of strap that had been put here, and it was like forced up, and in doing that, it forced her upper mouth open. So the victim's dead, head, it's just by itself, kind of had a like look to it, like its mouth had been forced open. So it's a really, really troubling picture. But just looking at the general dimensions of the head and comparing things as close as I could, I found that a lot of these minute little details matched very closely between Anna Schrader and the one thing was Anna Schrader had kind of a long, straight nose, and the torso victim's head seemed to have a really short nose like this. But you have to remember that was mostly because the strap had kind of done this and was kind of pushing her nose up like this, you know. So there was even an explanation for why their noses didn't quite match. But again, she was a petite woman, and because she was well known enough that we could look at her and determine her clothing sizes. And remember I said there was a suitcase that had clothes in it found near where one of the thighs was found under the Abernathy Bridge between Gladstone and Oregon City. And the clothing that was found in there matched the size of clothing that Anna Schrader would wear. So physically there was, and I know this, we talk about this a lot in the latter portion of the documentary about, reasons why, physically, some of us think Anna Schrader is the victim beyond just the backstory and, bruising and, the fact that the local police would have motive being involved in this crime. But beyond that, there's those physical attributes. And again, there was really no other missing women, during that time that it would have made sense for the Portland police to get involved in the case. And what's really interesting is that, they kind of made this master list of all these people that had, potentially disappeared or were missing that could be this victim. And a lot of these people didn't even really match with the description of the victim's body parts that much. And here you have Anna Schrader, a local Portlander who was about the same height as they predicted the victim was. She had the same type of hair, roughly about the same weight, and she had disappeared at like exactly the right time. And she not once back then during the original investigation was ever considered as a possible victim, which is illogical, again, unless you have the local police or whoever's running the investigation trying to keep from having the right person identified because they had an agenda against that. They didn't want Anna Schrader found. They didn't want Anna Schrader identified because then the police would start having a lot of questions they would need to answer. Questions they wouldn't want to answer. So that's kind of the overall like why I think the way I do on this thing. I know the case got reopened a couple years ago, and and I don't think there's been any progress really since then. In fact, I want to say the people that are running it now aren't as convinced, or maybe they think historians are just kind of running away with their fantasies and whatnot. I don't know, but I certainly haven't seen any better victims. And you'd think if the police were trying so hard, they would find someone that matched kind of closely and say, "Oh, it was that person." Pay some woman a little bit of cash to leave town, and then say, "Oh yeah, look who's missing all of a sudden. That must be the murder victim." I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. But and I didn't realize I was going to get this deep, this entrenched in this case as I did, because there really wasn't. There's only so much information I was able to find on this, and even when I searched old newspaper clippings, there wasn't really a lot of articles on it, and maybe because it's one of those cases that came and went so quickly. It kind of lost its steam. And you'd think something like that happening back then would keep people's attention for a while. I mean, murder cases like that don't even really happen anymore. I mean, we have graphic murders that happen, but usually dismemberment cases don't happen as much as they used to for whatever reason. I mean, I guess that's a good thing. But yeah, it sucks that it looks like, at least, unless somebody's got some hidden confession somewhere, it looks like officially, this case is going to linger as unsolved forever, because all we have are our theories, about who it is. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that Anna Schrader is the victim. And so because of that, that's the direction I go in. But even by the end of the film, I say, like, I'm pretty sure it's her, but we can never know for absolute certainty. And that's kind of the case of the new project that I'm working on right now, which is not going to be as big. And unfortunately, I have some film that I can use, but I can't go out to the locations to video them, which is kind of a big thing on my channel, is going to the locations where things have happened. Well, because of coronavirus is dumbass, you can't really do much these days. And but yeah, it's another case where we don't know definitively who the victim is, but people have a pretty strong idea of who it is. And we don't know exactly who did the killing, but we have a general idea of who it might have been. And of course, I have this elongated Historic Murders of Portland series I've been doing. Yeah, I think my first collection was almost 60 episodes, like 55 episodes or something. I'm a little over halfway through what I'm calling my second season. Thank God I did a lot of these before coronavirus showed up, so that I can still post them and not be sitting here without any exterior content. But yeah, it's about 13, 14 episodes for the second season. I've posted like 8 of them. So those are going to keep getting posted, every couple of days or so. And then I have a third season set up, ready to go. And I have a bunch more cases that I found. So, I mean, there's probably going to be a fourth and maybe even a fifth season of that. Because, I never really was that interested in really old criminal history in Portland. And I've always had an interest in like 60s and 70s and 80s crime. And I was kind of not really paying any attention to older crime. And one of the historians that I interviewed for my documentary is a local guy named J.D. Chandler, who's actually written several books about crime in Portland. And he was one of the first people that, one of the first things I read on this case was something he'd written. And he posts, he has, from time to time stuff posted on YouTube, but he also has a show that he does with another local historian, J.B. Fisher, I believe is his name. They're both J something Fisher, or J something, and then their last name. And J.B. Fisher was someone who I actually wanted to interview for my documentary. And essentially, this documentary, it just, for some reason, it took so long to cut this freaking thing together. It just took so long. And I got to a point where I just wanted it done. I was pulling the hairs out of my head. I just wanted it done already. And so that kind of kept me from, because he was one of the guys that was responsible for kind of digging up a lot of these other potential victims who, aside from Anna Schrader, the information that I found about, Marion Coffey and Eva Panko, um, those were that was research that he had done. So I wanted to talk to him more about that angle. Then, of course, the case as a whole, and it just never happened because after about 6-7 months, I was like, I just want this freaking thing done. I want it done. It was taking a lot longer than it felt it should have, but I got it done, and it's on my channel. So if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. The Woman in the River. You can see a lot of those interviews I do with J.D. Chandler and oh god, I'm obviously getting tired because I'm just forgetting everything now. Teresa Griffin Kennedy, or Dupay is her last name, but I think she writes under a different name because her husband was also there when I did the interviews. And he didn't say a lot, but he wasn't really the focus of the conversation. But he wrote a really great book that I bought called Behind the Badge in River City. It's on my shelf over here. And I just finished reading it like a couple weeks ago. And it's not your just run of the mill, biography. Here's just, I was a cop. This happened one day. This happened another day. It's more a series of short kind of memoirs and vignettes. And, the first couple don't really talk too much about specific cases or anything. It's more about, the life when you become an officer, kind of what the life is like. And then, what it's like being a beat cop, what it's like being a patrolman, what it's like working a detective, all these different things. And, so it's a very interesting take on living that life through that period. And it was really good. I mean, I'm a guy that, a book's got to be pretty good to keep my attention. I might read through 10 pages, be like, nah, not feeling it. And of course, one thing I love is 70s crime history. And a lot of this was 60s and 70s. So it was right down my alley. And it's a book that I literally, I read from cover to cover in less than a day. I started reading it one night, finished it the next evening. It had my attention. And the fact that it was local history too, it was just like, oh God, just take my money. Oh God, and take my nose with you while you're at it, because this thing is no good anymore. I honestly don't even know how I've been doing playing Mario Kart, because like I'm playing it, but I'm playing it like on autopilot. I don't even know how good I did the last round. And I'm getting a little bit off topic because I pretty much covered the whole case. I mean, that was it. I discussed the crime, the police's potential connection, and of course Anna Schrader and the whole thing. But yeah, I have the documentary up on my channel. I also have a bunch of I have a playlist called My Documentary, and it's full of updates that I was doing. And it's me videoing myself while I was going out and shooting all this footage. Because I was shooting the actual footage with my DSLR camera and then using my, this guy right here to video myself while I was out there to provide updates. And I want to try doing live streaming with my iPhone. It's an iPhone 5. It's an old one, but it keeps kicking for me. But it's saying that I'm not meeting their requirements, and I'm not sure exactly what that means because I looked through their list of requirements and I think my phone works. But one of the things said, like, even if you hit like 1,000 subscribers, you have to have at least 1,000 subscribers to be able to live stream. Sometimes you have to wait. I don't know. I mean, it's working on here, so I think it's just being dumb. It just won't let me live stream. So for now, any live streaming I do is going to be right here on my MacBook, my 7.5-year-old MacBook. That I don't know how it's still alive. I don't know how it's still kicking. But oh my God, itchy. Allergy season too. The allergy season is going crazy. I also need to take my eye drops for my freaking dry eye. I thought about doing it beforehand, but sometimes it'll make your eyes a little itchy and dry, and I didn't want to be like doing this the whole time I was walking, or at least for the first like 30 minutes. But anyway, thanks. Thanks for watching. I want to do this from time to time. Just delving into certain things, obviously talking about new subject matter, but from time to time delving into things that I had to keep very concise and couldn't go outside of the borders on. Whatever. It's a day-to-day thing. One day I may not have anything to say. The next day I'll be like, hey, I'm gonna live stream that tonight or today, whatever. I'll try to do it more at nighttime because that seems to be when more people are kind of not scattering through here. And because we're quarantined, I can't really go somewhere to be completely in private. You understand, I'm sure. And again, go watch my documentary if you haven't seen it. Again, it's called The Woman in the River. I've probably called it The Woman in the Water once or twice because I think I was originally thinking of calling it that. But it's The Woman in the River. It's on my channel. Probably the quickest way to get to it is I have a playlist called like My Long Documentaries. It'll be under there along with some other, mostly things I did that were more than like 20 minutes long. All that said, thank you so much for watching. If you were here for the whole time, thank you. You are a trooper. And till next time. Remember to like, share, subscribe. Hit up my Patreon, that gobbledygook. And till next time, I'll see you guys later. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian.